The October sun painted the oak leaves of Beacon Hill in golden and red tones, creating an almost poetic contrast with the tension that hung in the air of the elegant three-story Victorian mansion. Vincent Torino adjusted the knot of his Italian silk tie while observing through the window of his second-floor office, his dark eyes following the movement of people on Charles Street. At 42, Vinny had learned that patience was an essential virtue in both legitimate business and others. "Mr. Torino, the car is ready," announced Tommy Benedetto, his driver and bodyguard for more than a decade, appearing at the office door with his characteristic posture. Always alert, always ready. Vinny nodded, taking the Italian wool coat that hung on the leather chair. The office perfectly reflected his personality. Classic mahogany furniture, shelves filled with books on history and philosophy, and a discreet collection of Renaissance art. Nothing there suggested the less conventional activities that financed that refined lifestyle. "Tommy, are you sure the meeting with the Colombos is confirmed for 3? Asked Vinny, checking the Rolex Submariner on his wrist, a wedding gift from his late wife, Isabella. "Absolutely confirmed, boss. Sal called an hour ago. They want to discuss the situation at the East Boston ports," Tommy replied, holding the door open. Vinny sighed almost imperceptibly. The Torino family business had expanded significantly in the last 2 years, especially after Isabella's death. It was as if he had channeled all his pain and anger into building an even more solid empire. The construction company, Torino and Associates, was just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it, a complex network of operations controlled everything from sports betting to importing special merchandise through Boston's port. Going down the marble staircase, Vinny passed through the main living room where family portraits adorned the walls. His attention momentarily fixed on a photo of Isabella holding Marco when he was only 3 years old. The boy, now 8, had the same dark eyes as his father, but the sweet smile and gentle nature of his mother. "Is Marco at school?" Vinny asked Tommy as they walked toward the front door. "Yes, boss. The new housekeeper, Elena, went to pick him up at 2:30. Should be arriving home now. Elena Rodriguez." Vinny was still getting used to her presence in the house. The 35-year-old Mexican woman had been hired 3 weeks ago, after the previous housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, had decided to retire. Elena came with excellent references from a family in Cambridge, and her experience with children had been the deciding factor. Marco needed stability, especially considering that Vinny was increasingly absent due to business. The black Cadillac Escalade was parked in front of the house, its engine purring softly. Tommy opened the rear door, and Vinny got in, settling into the beige leather seat. As the vehicle glided through the historic streets of Beacon Hill, Vinny observed Boston's daily life through the dark-tinted windows. Families walked on the brick sidewalks, children played in small parks, college students headed to classes. It was a world so different from his, a world where people didn't need to constantly look over their shoulders, where decisions didn't involve life or death, where fathers could simply be fathers. "Boss, can I ask a question?" Tommy broke the silence as he navigated traffic towards the north end. "Sure, Tommy. How's the boy? Marco, I mean. I know it's not my business, but..." Vinny sighed, running his hand through the gray hair at his temples. Well, I think. Elena says he's a good boy, obedient, intelligent, but He paused, struggling with words he rarely needed to use. "I don't know how to be a father without Isabella, Tommy. She was the one who knew how to handle these things." Tommy nodded understandingly. He himself had 3 children and understood the challenges of fatherhood, even without the additional complications that came with Vinny's lifestyle. "If I may say, boss, the boy just needs his father. Not the boss, not the businessman, just the father." Tommy's words echoed in Vinny's mind as they arrived at Nonna's restaurant in the heart of the North End. The Italian establishment was a perfect front for business meetings, public enough to seem legitimate, but with private rooms in the back where delicate conversations could happen without interference. Sal Colombo was already waiting at a corner table, accompanied by 2 of his men. Sal was a corpulent man in his 50s, with gray hair slicked back and a smile that never reached his eyes. He represented one of Boston's oldest families, and his alliance with the Torinos had been crucial for business expansion. "Vinny, my friend!" Sal stood up, extending his arms in a warm embrace that masked the purely commercial nature of their relationship. "Sal, how's the family?" Vinny returned the greeting, settling into the chair facing his ally. "All well, thank God." "And Marco? How's the boy?" "Growing fast," Vinny replied, accepting the glass of red wine Sal had poured. "But let's get to business. Tommy told me you want to discuss the ports." The conversation that followed was typical of the world Vinny lived in, a careful dance of words, where much was said without ever being explicitly mentioned. They talked about special shipments, protection fees, and strategic partnerships. To any casual observer, it would seem like a conversation between businessmen discussing logistics and investments. But Vinny knew the truth behind each euphemism. He knew he was making decisions that would affect hundreds of lives, that would move millions of dollars through channels that preferred to remain invisible. It was a world where loyalty was bought and sold, where betrayal was punished severely, and where the line between right and wrong had become so blurred that sometimes he couldn't even see it anymore. "So we're in agreement," Sal concluded after an hour of negotiations. "The new arrangements go into effect next week." Vinny nodded, shaking Sal's hand. "Pleasure doing business with you, as always." As he left the restaurant, Vinny checked the time. It was only 2:15 in the afternoon. The meeting had ended much earlier than expected. Normally, he would use the extra time to visit some of the family's other businesses, or perhaps meet with his accountants to review the books. But something inside him, perhaps Tommy's words earlier, prompted him to make a different decision. "Tommy, let's go home," he said, getting into the Escalade. "Are you sure, boss? I thought you wanted to stop by the construction office." "No, let's go home. I want to see Marco." Tommy smiled through the rear-view mirror. "Good idea, boss." The trip back to Beacon Hill was silent, with Vinny lost in thought. When was the last time he had arrived home while Marco was still awake? When was the last time they had dinner together, or that he had helped the boy with homework? The questions bothered him more than he'd like to admit. Isabella had always been the bridge between him and Marco. She understood both Vinny's world and a child's needs, and managed to navigate between the two with a grace he envied. After her death, Vinny had convinced himself that the best way to honor her memory was by building an empire that would guarantee Marco's future. But now, sitting in the back seat of the car, he began to question whether he wasn't actually building a barrier between him and his son. When they arrived at the mansion in Beacon Hill, Vinny noticed that the living room lights were on, and he could hear voices coming from inside. One was clearly Marco's, high-pitched and animated in a way Vinny hadn't heard in a long time. The other was Elena's, but there was something different in her tone, something warm and maternal that made Vinny pause at the front door. "Do you want me to come in with you, boss?" Tommy asked. "No, you can go. See you tomorrow morning." Vinny opened the front door silently, hung his coat in the hall closet, and walked toward the voices. What he saw when he reached the living room entrance made him stop completely, as if he had been punched in the stomach. Marco was sitting on the floor, surrounded by books and papers, but they weren't school books. Elena was kneeling beside him, and both were singing. No, it wasn't exactly singing. They were reciting something in Spanish, their voices blending in a soft and melodious harmony. But that wasn't what had left Vinny speechless. It was the expression on his son's face, an expression of pure joy and concentration that he hadn't seen since before Isabella's death. Marco was smiling, really smiling, in a way that illuminated his entire face. Elena noticed Vinny's presence first, her eyes widening slightly with surprise. "Mr. Torino, we weren't expecting you so early." Marco turned around, and for a moment, Vinny saw a flash of something that could have been fear in the boy's eyes. Fear that his father would disapprove of whatever they were doing. "Dad!" Marco got up quickly, as if he had been caught doing something wrong. "Elena was teaching me." "What were you doing?" Vinny asked, his voice coming out harsher than intended. Elena stood up too, smoothing her apron. "I was teaching Marco some traditional Mexican songs, Mr. Torino. He showed interest in my culture, and I thought it would be educational. If you prefer that I don't." No, Vinny interrupted, realizing how his presence had instantly changed the atmosphere of the room. No, it's fine. I just wasn't expecting it. He looked at the papers scattered on the floor and saw that Elena had written the song lyrics in Spanish, with English translations alongside. There were also drawings, apparently made by Marco, of musical instruments and symbols that Vinny recognized as being related to Mexican culture. Marco, do you like this? Vinny asked, trying to soften his tone of voice. The boy nodded shyly. Elena was telling me about the Day of the Dead, Dad. It's a celebration where people remember people who died, but in a happy way. She said maybe we could do something to remember Mom. Marco's words hit Vinny like lightning. For 2 years, he had avoided talking about Isabella with the boy, thinking it would be too painful for both of them. He had removed most of her photos from the house, stored her clothes and belongings, tried to move forward. But there was his 8-year-old son, clearly needing a way to process his mother's loss. Elena, Vinny said, his voice softer now, could you give us a moment? Of course, Mr. Torino. I'll prepare dinner. Elena left the room discreetly, but not before giving Marco an encouraging smile. Vinny knelt on the floor beside his son, something he hadn't done in a long time. Up close, he could see that Marco had grown. His features were more defined, and there was a maturity in his eyes that shouldn't be there at 8 years old. Marco, do you miss Mom? The boy nodded, his eyes filling with tears. Every day, Dad. But you never want to talk about her? Marco's simple and honest confession broke something inside Vinny. He had thought he was protecting his son by avoiding the subject, but he was actually denying both of them the chance to process the pain together. I miss her too, son. Every day. Vinny pulled Marco into a hug, feeling how the boy melted in his arms. I'm sorry for not talking about her. I thought it would be easier that way. Elena said that in her culture, when someone dies, they throw a party to celebrate the person's life. She said Mom would like to be remembered with joy, not sadness. Vinny looked at the papers on the floor again, seeing them with different eyes. Elena wasn't just teaching Marco about Mexican culture. She was helping him find a healthy way to deal with loss, something that Vinny, with all his experience in business and power, hadn't been able to do. Would you like to learn more about this? Vinny asked. Marco nodded enthusiastically. Elena said we could make an altar for Mom with photos and things she liked, and that we could cook her favorite food. Lasagna, Vinny said, smiling for the first time in weeks. Your mother made the best lasagna in Boston. Elena said she could teach me how to make it too. In that moment, Vinny realized that Elena had accomplished in 3 weeks something he hadn't been able to do in 2 years. She had brought back the light in his son's eyes. And more than that, she had found a way to honor Isabella's memory that was both respectful and healing. As father and son talked for the first time in a long time about Isabella, about longing and about love, Vinny began to understand that perhaps there was more to life than power and control. Perhaps there was room for different traditions, for new perspectives, for the simple wisdom of a woman who understood that healing a broken heart sometimes required more than money or influence. The sun was setting over Boston, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink that reflected in the mansion's windows in Beacon Hill. And for the first time in 2 years, Vincent Torino was truly present in his own home, learning with his son about a culture he had never considered, and discovering that sometimes the most important lessons came from the most unexpected places. 3 days had passed since Vinny arrived home early and witnessed Elena's impromptu lesson with Marco. During this time, he found himself observing more closely the interactions between the Mexican housekeeper and his son, and what he saw intrigued him more and more. On Thursday morning, Vinny decided to cancel a morning meeting with his lawyers to have breakfast at home, something he hadn't done in months. When he went down to the kitchen at 7:30, he found Elena preparing pancakes while Marco, still in pajamas, helped mix the batter. Good morning, Mr. Torino, Elena greeted, slightly surprised by his presence. Would you like to join us for breakfast? Dad! Marco ran to hug him, his small hands still dirty with flour. Elena is teaching me how to make pancakes like her grandmother used to make in Mexico. Vinny settled at the kitchen table, observing the dynamic between the two. Elena had infinite patience with Marco, explaining each step of the cooking process while the boy asked incessant questions about ingredients and techniques. But there was something deeper happening there. Elena was teaching Marco about responsibility, about the importance of following instructions, about how small gestures of care could transform into great demonstrations of love. "Elena," Vinny said as she served the golden pancakes, "do you have children?" The question seemed to catch her by surprise. Elena paused for a moment, a shadow passing over her dark eyes. "I had a daughter, Mr. Torino. Sophia. She died when she was 6 years old. Leukemia." The silence that followed was heavy. Marco stopped eating, his big eyes fixed on Elena with an understanding that went beyond his 8 years. "I'm sorry," Vinny said, genuinely touched. "I didn't know. It was 5 years ago," Elena continued, her voice firm but loaded with emotion. "That's why I came to the United States. I needed a new beginning. And that's why," she looked at Marco with tenderness, "that's why I understand what it's like to lose someone we love. And I understand how important it is to keep that person's memory alive." Marco got up from his chair and went to Elena, hugging her around the waist. "I'm sorry about Sophia," he said with the pure sincerity of children. Elena stroked the boy's dark hair. "Thank you, mijo. But you know what I learned? I learned that when we love someone, that person never really goes away. They live here." She touched Marco's chest. "In our heart. And when we do things that person liked, when we tell stories about them, when we cook their favorite food, it's like they're with us again." Vinny observed the scene, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. There was a wisdom in Elena that transcended formal education or social status. She had faced a devastating loss and found a way to transform her pain into something constructive, into something that could help other people heal. "Elena," Vinny said after Marco went upstairs to get dressed for school, "thank you for everything you're doing for him." She smiled, beginning to wash the dishes. "Marco is a special boy, Mr. Torino. He just needs to know he's loved and safe. And you? Do you feel safe here?" The question seemed strange, even to Vinny, but there was something about Elena's vulnerability that made him want to protect her. Maybe it was because she was taking such good care of Marco, or maybe it was something deeper. "Yes," she replied after a pause. "This is a good house, a house where I can honor my daughter's memory by helping another boy grow." That afternoon, Vinny had a particularly tense meeting with some Russian associates who were trying to expand their operations into Torino territory. The negotiation involved veiled threats, shows of force, and eventually, an agreement that satisfied both parties, at least temporarily. When he arrived home at 6 in the evening, Vinny found the house filled with delicious aromas. Following the smell, he reached the kitchen and found Elena and Marco preparing what seemed to be a banquet. "Dad, you arrived just in time." Marco ran to him, wearing a small apron that Elena had improvised with a dish towel. "We're making real Mexican food." The kitchen table was covered with ingredients: fresh tomatoes, onions, peppers, cilantro, limes, and various types of peppers that Vinny didn't recognize. Elena was teaching Marco to make fresh salsa, guiding his small hands as he chopped tomatoes with a plastic knife. "Mr. Torino," Elena said, "I hope you don't mind. Marco asked about my country's food, and I thought it would be a good opportunity for him to learn about different cultures." "Of course I don't mind," Vinny replied, realizing he really didn't mind. "Can I help?" The question surprised both Elena and Marco. Vinny Torino, the man who commanded a criminal empire, who made decisions affecting millions of dollars, was offering to help cook. "Do you know how to cook, Dad?" Marco asked, genuinely curious. Vinny laughed, a real laugh he hadn't heard from himself in a long time. "Your mother taught me some things, but I never learned to make Mexican food." Elena smiled, extending an apron to him. "Then today you learn." What followed was one of the most surreal afternoons of Vinny's life. He found himself learning to make tortillas from scratch. His hands, which had signed million-dollar contracts and occasionally ordered things he preferred not to remember, now covered with corn dough. Elena was a patient teacher, explaining not only the culinary techniques, but also the history behind each dish. She told about how her grandmother had taught her these recipes in the small village of Oaxaca where she grew up, about how food was a way to keep family traditions alive, about how each ingredient had special meaning. In my culture, Elena explained while teaching Marco to season the chicken for tacos, the kitchen is the heart of the house. It's where families gather, where stories are told, where love is shared. Marco absorbed every word, asking questions about Mexico, about Elena's family, about traditions that were completely new to him. Vinny watched, fascinated by his son's natural curiosity and Elena's infinite patience in answering every question. "Elena," Marco said while they waited for the tortillas to cook, "can you teach me Spanish?" "Of course, mijo. Would you like to learn?" "Yes, that way I can talk to more people. And maybe someday I can visit Mexico and see the place where you grew up." Elena looked at Vinny as if asking permission. He nodded, realizing he was witnessing something important. His son was developing curiosity about the world beyond Boston, beyond the privileged bubble he lived in. When they finally sat down for dinner, the table was full of colorful and aromatic dishes: chicken tacos with fresh salsa, freshly made guacamole, Mexican rice seasoned with tomato and spices, and refried beans that Elena had prepared with black beans. "This is incredible," Vinny said after the first bite, and he really meant it. The food had complex and vibrant flavors that were completely different from anything he was used to. "Food tastes better when it's made with love," Elena said, smiling at Marco, "and when it's shared with special people." During dinner, Elena told stories about Mexico, about colorful festivals, about ancient traditions, about the importance of family and community. Marco listened with shining eyes, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated surprising maturity. "Elena," Marco asked at one point, "why did you come here if Mexico is so beautiful?" The question was innocent, but Vinny saw Elena hesitate. He knew there was more to her story than she had told, and suspected the reasons for her immigration were more complex than simply seeking a new beginning after her daughter's death. "Sometimes," Elena said carefully, "people need to go to new places to find hope again. And sometimes when we find a new family to care for, we discover that home isn't a place, it's where the people we love are." Vinny felt a tightness in his chest with those words. He began to understand that Elena didn't see her job just as employment. She saw Marco as a chance to be a mother again, to channel all the love she had to give to a child who desperately needed maternal care. After dinner, while Elena and Marco cleaned the kitchen together, Vinny retreated to his office. But instead of reviewing business documents or returning important calls, he found himself thinking about the afternoon he had spent. When was the last time he had genuinely laughed? When was the last time he had learned something new just for the pleasure of learning? When was the last time he had felt part of a real family instead of just being the distant provider? His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Sal Colombo. "Vinny, we need to talk. There have been some developments with the Russians." "What kind of developments?" Vinny asked, instantly returning to business mode. "The kind that requires our immediate attention. Can I come over in an hour?" Vinny looked through the office window, seeing Elena and Marco in the backyard. She was teaching the boy to identify different types of plants, their voices carried by the October night wind. "No," Vinny said, surprising himself. "Let's meet tomorrow morning at the office." "Are you sure?" "This is important, Vinny." "I'm sure. Tomorrow morning." Vinny hung up the phone and went downstairs to join Elena and Marco in the garden. It was the first time in 2 years that he had chosen his family over business, and the feeling was both liberating and terrifying. As the three walked through the garden under the October stars, Elena pointing out constellations and telling Mexican legends about them, Vinny began to understand that perhaps there was more than one way to be strong. Perhaps true strength came not only from power and control, but also from the ability to be vulnerable, to learn, to allow other people to touch your life in unexpected ways. And for the first time since Isabella's death, Vinny began to imagine a different future, a future where he could be both a present father and a successful businessman, where his house could be a real home, and where traditions from different cultures could mix to create something new and beautiful. But he also knew that the world he lived in didn't easily forgive changes in priorities. And as he watched Marco laugh at Elena's stories, part of him wondered if it would be possible to protect this new happiness from the dangers that always lurked in the shadows of his life. Friday morning brought with it a dense fog that covered Boston like a gray blanket, creating an almost somber atmosphere that seemed to foreshadow the events that were to come. Vinny woke earlier than usual, around 5:30, with a feeling of unease he couldn't fully explain. Going down silently to the kitchen, he found Elena already awake, preparing coffee and organizing Marco's breakfast. She wore a simple robe over her pajamas, her dark hair tied in a loose bun, and there was something comforting about her morning presence in the kitchen. "Good morning, Mr. Torino," she said softly so as not to wake Marco. "I wasn't expecting to see you so early." "Couldn't sleep," Vinny admitted, accepting the cup of coffee she offered him. "Elena, can I ask a personal question?" She nodded, continuing to prepare breakfast. "Last night, when Marco asked why you came to the United States, I felt there was more to the story." Elena paused, her hands becoming still over the cutting board where she was slicing fruit. For a long moment she remained silent, and Vinny began to regret having asked. "You're right," she said finally, her voice low. "There is more. After Sophia died, I got involved with the wrong people. People who promised to help me pay her medical bills, but who actually wanted to use me to transport things across the border." Vinny felt a chill in his stomach. He knew that type of wrong people well. "When I discovered what they were really asking me to do, I tried to get out. But they didn't like that. They said I knew too much, that I was a risk." Elena turned to face him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I had to flee in the middle of the night, Mr. Torino. I left everything behind, my house, my friends, my daughter's grave. I came here with nothing but the clothes on my back and false documents that cost all my savings." The confession hit Vinny like a punch to the stomach. Elena wasn't just an immigrant seeking a better life. She was a refugee, fleeing from people Vinny knew were capable of extreme violence. "Elena, you're safe now," he said, his voice loaded with a conviction that surprised even him. "No one will hurt you while you're under my roof." She smiled through her tears. "Thank you, Mr. Torino. But you don't understand. These people, they have connections everywhere. I live in fear every day that they'll find me." Before Vinny could respond, they heard footsteps on the stairs. Marco appeared in the kitchen, still in pajamas, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Good morning, Dad. Good morning, Elena." He ran to hug both of them, completely oblivious to the serious conversation he had interrupted. "Good morning, mijo," Elena said, quickly drying her eyes and returning to maternal mode. "How about pancakes with fruit today?" While Elena prepared breakfast and Marco chattered about his plans for the day, Vinny retreated to his office. His mind was working quickly, processing the information Elena had shared. He knew he needed to find out more about her situation, not just out of curiosity, but from a genuine need to protect her. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. "Joey, it's me. I need you to do a discreet search for me." Joey Marconi was Boston's best private investigator and had worked for the Torino family for more than a decade. If there was information to be found, Joey would find it. "Sure, boss. What do you need?" Elena Rodriguez, Mexican, about 35 years old. Arrived in the United States approximately 5 years ago. "I want to know everything. Where she came from, why she came, and if anyone is looking for her." "Understood. How much time do I have?" "I want the information by the end of the day." After hanging up, Vinny prepared to go to the office to meet Sal Colombo. The meeting he had postponed the night before couldn't be delayed again, especially if the Russians were causing problems. The Torino and Associates office was located in an elegant building in Boston's financial district. From the outside, it looked like a perfectly legitimate construction company, which technically it was. The company really built buildings, renovated properties, and managed construction contracts. It was just a small percentage of its activities that ventured into darker territories. Sal was already waiting in the conference room when Vinny arrived, accompanied by 2 of his men, and with a particularly somber expression on his face. "Vinny, we have a problem," Sal said without preamble. "The Russians aren't respecting the agreement we made." "What kind of disrespect?" Vinny asked, settling into the leather chair at the head of the table. "They're moving merchandise through our ports without paying the agreed fees. And last night one of our men was discouraged from asking questions about a specific shipment." Vinny felt the familiar tension settling in his shoulders. This type of disrespect couldn't be tolerated. In the world he lived in, allowing someone to step on his territory without consequences was an invitation for others to do the same. "What type of merchandise?" he asked. "That's what worries us," Sal replied, sliding a folder across the table. "Our contacts at the port say there are containers coming from Mexico, and there are rumors it's not just drugs." Vinny opened the folder and examined the photographs and documents inside. There were images of containers being unloaded, shipment lists with codes he didn't recognize, and reports of suspicious activity at the ports. "Human trafficking?" he asked, his voice getting colder. "That's what we suspect. And if it's true, it brings a kind of federal attention none of us want." Vinny closed the folder, his mind working quickly. Human trafficking was a line he had never crossed and never would cross. There were many ways to make money in the world of organized crime, but exploiting vulnerable people wasn't one of them. "Schedule a meeting with Dmitry Volkov for tomorrow," he said finally. "It's time to clarify some misunderstandings." The meeting with the Russians was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at a neutral warehouse at the port. Vinny spent the rest of Friday dealing with other aspects of business, but his mind kept returning to Elena and her morning confession. Around 4 in the afternoon, Joey Marconi called with the requested information. "Boss, you're going to want to hear this in person. Can I come over?" "Come now." Joey arrived 20 minutes later, carrying a thick folder and with a serious expression that Vinny rarely saw on the normally relaxed investigator. "Elena Rodriguez is real," Joey began, opening the folder. "Born in Oaxaca, Mexico in 1988. Had a daughter, Sofia, who died of leukemia in 2019. But the story gets interesting after that." Joey slid several photographs across the table. After her daughter's death, she got involved with the Sinaloa cartel, not as a dealer, but as what they call a mule. She transported money and small amounts of drugs across the border. Vinny examined the photos, seeing Elena in various situations that clearly weren't touristic, crossing borders, meeting with men he recognized as cartel types. "But here's where it gets interesting," Joey continued. "In 2020, she witnessed something she shouldn't have seen. One of the cartel bosses, Miguel El Lobo Hernandez, executing a rival during a negotiation that went wrong. Elena was making a delivery and ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. And she fled," Vinny said, beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. "Exactly. But not before El Lobo discovered she had seen everything. Since then, there's a price on her head. $50,000 for whoever brings information about her whereabouts." Vinny felt a chill run down his spine. Elena wasn't just fleeing from wrong people. She was fleeing from one of Mexico's most violent cartels, and there was a death contract on her head. "There's more," Joey said, his voice becoming even more serious. "El Lobo has connections in Boston. Specifically, he has an agreement with the Russians you're having problems with. Dmitry Volkov has been facilitating some of the cartel's money laundering operations." The pieces began to fit together in Vinny's mind in a way that left him deeply uncomfortable. The Russians were moving Mexican merchandise through his ports. Elena was fleeing from Mexicans connected to the Russians, and now he was in the middle of it all. "Joey, I want you to put discreet surveillance on my house, 24 hours a day, and I want you to find out everything you can about the Russians' operations with the Mexicans." "Understood, boss. But can I ask a question? Why so much interest in the housekeeper?" Vinny paused, considering the question. Why did he care so much? Was it just because Elena was taking good care of Marco? Or was there something more? "She's important to my son," he said finally, "and that makes her important to me." When Vinny arrived home that night, he found Elena and Marco in the living room, working on an art project. They were creating what appeared to be a colorful altar decorated with paper flowers, candles, and photographs. "Dad!" Marco ran to him excited. "Look what we're doing! It's an altar for the Day of the Dead to remember Mom!" Vinny looked at the altar under construction, seeing a photo of Isabella in the center, surrounded by vibrant decorations and symbolic offerings. There was something deeply touching about the way Elena had helped Marco transform his pain into something beautiful. "It's beautiful," Vinny said, genuinely impressed. "Your mother would be proud." Elena smiled, but Vinny could see the tension in her eyes. She knew he had discovered something about her past. He could see it in the way she avoided his direct gaze. "Marco," Vinny said, "how about you go take a bath? Then we can finish the altar together." When Marco went upstairs, Vinny turned to Elena. "We need to talk." She nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she organized the art materials. "You found out, didn't you?" "I found out. And now I understand why you're so afraid." Vinny sat beside her on the sofa. "Elena, you need to know that the situation is more complicated than we thought." He told her about the connection between El Lobo and the Russians, about how their worlds were crossing in dangerous ways. He saw fear grow in her eyes as he explained the implications. "I should leave," she said when he finished. "I can't put you and Marco in danger." "No," Vinny said firmly. "You're not going anywhere. Marco needs you, and I won't let anything happen to you." "Mr. Torino, you don't understand. These people are—" "I understand perfectly," Vinny interrupted. "And they're going to discover that messing with my family was a very big mistake." In that moment, looking at Elena, a woman who had lost everything, who had risked everything to escape a violent past, who had found a way to transform her pain into love for a child who wasn't hers, Vinny made a decision that would change everything. He wasn't just going to protect Elena, he was going to end the threat once and for all. And as the two sat in the living room, surrounded by preparations for a Mexican celebration of life and death, Vinny began to plan a war that would determine not only Elena's future, but the future of his own family. The altar for Isabella glowed softly in the candlelight, a symbol of love that transcended death. But in the shadows of the mansion in Beacon Hill, much darker forces were moving, and Vinny knew that the next few days would test not only his ability to protect those he loved, but also his ability to maintain his humanity in a world that frequently demanded he abandon it. Saturday dawned with a leaden sky over Boston, the heavy clouds promising a storm that perfectly mirrored the tension building in Vinny's life. He woke at 5 in the morning, his mind already working on the details of the meeting with Dmitry Volkov that would take place that afternoon. Going down to the kitchen, he found Elena preparing coffee, but there was something different in her posture, a stiffness that wasn't there before. She had slept little, that was obvious from the dark circles under her eyes. "Good morning," she said softly, offering him a cup of coffee. "Mr. Torino, I've been thinking about our conversation last night." "Elena, please let me speak," she interrupted, her voice firm, despite the tremor in her hands. "I can't stay here, knowing I'm putting you and Marco in danger. These people, they have no limits. They would kill a child without hesitation if it served their purposes." Vinny put the cup on the counter and turned to face her completely. "Elena, do you really think I would allow anything to happen to Marco? Or to you? You're a powerful man, Mr. Torino. But these cartels, I know exactly what these cartels are capable of doing," Vinny said, his voice getting colder. "And they're going to discover they underestimated who they are dealing with." Elena studied him for a moment, and Vinny saw the exact moment she began to understand. There was more to Vincent Torino than a simple construction businessman. There was sharp intelligence in her eyes, and she had survived long enough in the criminal world to recognize when she was in the presence of someone truly dangerous. "Who are you really?" she asked in a low voice. Before Vinny could answer, Marco appeared in the kitchen, still in pajamas and with messy hair. "Good morning. Can we work on the altar today? Elena said we could make paper flowers." Marco's innocent presence broke the tension of the moment, but Vinny could see that Elena was still waiting for an answer. He decided she deserved the truce, at least part of it. "After Marco goes to play," he said in a low voice. Breakfast was a surreal experience. Marco chattered animatedly about his plans for the Day of the Dead altar, completely oblivious to the tension between the adults. Elena responded to his questions and comments with her usual patience, but Vinny could see she was struggling to maintain normalcy. After breakfast, while Marco watched cartoons in the living room, Vinny took Elena to his office. She looked around the environment, the bookshelves, the expensive furniture, the artwork, with new eyes. "My family has been in Boston for 4 generations, Vinny began, choosing his words carefully. "My great-grandfather came from Sicily in the early 20th century. Like many immigrants, he did what he needed to do to survive and prosper." Elena nodded, understanding what he wasn't saying directly. "Today, I have legitimate businesses. The construction company is real and profitable. But I also have other interests. Interests that give me resources and connections that an ordinary businessman wouldn't have." "You're in the mafia," Elena said, not as a question, but as a statement. "I'm a businessman who understands how the world really works," Vinny replied. "And part of that understanding includes knowing how to protect people who are important to me." Elena remained silent for a long moment, processing this information. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to understand that when I say I'm going to protect you, these aren't empty words. I have the means and the will to make it happen." "And the price?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "In my world, protection always has a price." Vinny approached her, seeing the fear and vulnerability in her eyes. "The only price is that you continue being who you are. Continue taking care of Marco as you have been. Continue bringing joy to this house. Continue teaching me that there's more to life than power and control." The words came out before he could censor them, revealing more about his feelings than he intended. Elena looked at him with surprise, and for a moment, Vinny saw something beyond fear in her eyes, something that could have been hope. "Mr. Torino." "Vinny," he corrected. "My name is Vinny." "Vinny," she repeated, testing the name. "Do you really believe you can protect me from El Lobo?" "I don't just believe," he said with a conviction that surprised even him. "I guarantee it." Vinny's phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was Tommy. "Boss, Volkov arrived early. He's at the warehouse with 6 men. Do you want me to come get you?" Vinny checked his watch. It was only 11 in the morning, but the meeting was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. Volkov was trying to gain a psychological advantage by arriving early. "I'll be there in an hour," Vinny said. "And Tommy, bring reinforcements." After hanging up, he turned to Elena. "I need to go out to resolve some business. I want you and Marco to stay home today. There are men watching the house. You won't see them, but they're there." Elena nodded, but Vinny could see the concern in her eyes. "Be careful," she said, and there was something in her voice that made Vinny's heart race. "I always am," he replied, briefly touching her face before leaving. The warehouse at Boston Sport was a neutral location that had been used for delicate meetings for decades. It was isolated enough to ensure privacy, but public enough to discourage open violence. When Vinny arrived with Tommy and 4 of his most trusted men, he found Dmitry Volkov waiting with his own team. Volkov was a tall, thin man in his 50s, with gray hair slicked back and cold blue eyes like Arctic ice. He wore an expensive wool coat and smoked Russian cigarettes, creating a cloud of smoke around him that seemed appropriate for his dark personality. "Vincent," Volkov said in English with a heavy accent. "Thank you for coming." "Dmitry," Vinny replied, keeping his voice neutral. "Let's get straight to the point. You're moving merchandise through my ports without paying the agreed fees." Volkov smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "Ah, yes. Small misunderstanding. You see, this particular merchandise, it's not exactly ours. We're just facilitating for our Mexican friends." "What type of merchandise?" Vinny asked, though he already knew the answer. "People," Volkov said bluntly. "People who very much want to come to America but don't have proper documents. We help with transportation." The confirmation of human trafficking made Vinny's blood boil, but he kept his expression neutral. "And you think that gives me less right to my fees?" "I think," Volkov said, taking a long drag on his cigarette, "that you should consider joining us in this enterprise. It's very profitable." "I'm not interested." "Pity," Volkov said, and his voice got colder. Because our Mexican friends are very interested in expanding operations in Boston, and they may not be as diplomatic as I am. Vinny knew he was being threatened, but he also knew Volkov was testing his resolve. Dmitri, let me be very clear. Any operation that happens at my ports pays my fees. There are no exceptions. And if we refuse, then you'll find other ports to use. Volkov laughed, a harsh and unpleasant sound. Vincent, you're being very stubborn about this. Maybe you need motivation to be more flexible. It was then that Volkov played his card. We know about your Mexican housekeeper, Elena Rodriguez. Our friends are very interested in reuniting with her. Vinny's blood froze, but he forced his expression to remain impassive. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you do, Volkov said, clearly satisfied to have hit a nerve. Beautiful woman. Pity she saw things she shouldn't have seen. El Lobo is offering generous reward for information about her. Vinny felt anger grow inside him like a red tide, but forced himself to maintain control. My personal life is none of your business, Dmitri. Everything becomes our business when it affects business, Volkov replied. Maybe we can reach agreement. You give us information about woman's location, and we forget about port fees. The proposal was exactly what Vinny expected, and confirmed his worst suspicions about the connection between the Russians and the Mexican cartel. But it also gave him the opening he needed. Interesting proposal, Vinny said, pretending to consider, but I need more details about this reward. Volkov smiled, thinking he had won. 50,000 American dollars. And El Lobo is willing to pay bonus if she's delivered alive. And why alive? He wants her to pay personally for what she saw. Wants to make example for others who might think of testifying against him. Vinny nodded slowly as if processing the information. I'll think about it. But meanwhile, the port fees remain in effect. Of course, Volkov said, clearly satisfied. But don't take too long to decide. El Lobo is not patient, man. The meeting ended with false handshakes and empty promises of mutual consideration. But when Vinny left the warehouse, his mind was already working on a plan that would solve all his problems at once. On the way home, he called Joey Marconi. Joey, I need everything you can find about Miguel El Lobo Hernandez. Where he is, who his men are, how he operates. And I need this information by tomorrow. This is going to be dangerous, boss. This guy has heavy protection. Leave that to me, Vinny said. Just get me the information. When he arrived home, he found Elena and Marco in the living room working on the altar for Isabella. The contrast between the peaceful domestic scene and the violence he had just planned was almost surreal. Dad! Marco ran to him. Look, we finished the altar. Elena said tonight we can light the candles and tell stories about Mom. Vinny looked at the completed altar. An explosion of vibrant colors, carefully made paper flowers, white candles, and in the center, a photo of Isabella smiling. It was beautiful and touching, a celebration of life instead of a lament for death. It's perfect, he said, hugging Marco. Your mother would be very proud. Elena approached, and Vinny could see the question in her eyes. He nodded almost imperceptibly, indicating that everything had gone well at the meeting. Vinny, she said in a low voice, while Marco arranged the flowers. Thank you for everything. Don't thank me yet, he replied. This isn't over yet. But looking at Elena, seeing the gratitude and something deeper in her eyes, Vinny knew he would do anything to protect her. She had brought light back to his house, had helped his son heal, had shown him there was more to life than power and control. And now, he would use all that power to ensure she could live without fear. That night, as the three sat before the candlelit altar, telling stories about Isabella and celebrating her memory, Vinny made a final decision. He wasn't just going to protect Elena, he was going to eliminate the threat completely. El Lobo had made a fatal mistake by threatening his family, and Vincent Torino was going to make sure it was the last mistake the cartel boss would make. Sunday dawned clear and cold in Boston, with a pale November sun filtering through the windows of the mansion in Beacon Hill. Vinny woke before dawn, his mind already focused on what needed to be done. Joey's information had arrived during the early hours, and what he discovered confirmed his worst suspicions about Miguel El Lobo Hernandez. El Lobo wasn't in Mexico. He was in Boston. The cartel boss had arrived in the city 3 days ago, staying in a suite at the Ritz-Carlton under a false name, but with documentation that Joey had managed to trace. Even more concerning, he had met twice with Dmitry Volkov, and there were rumors he was planning to permanently expand cartel operations to the East Coast. Vinny went down to the kitchen and found Elena preparing coffee, but this time she wasn't alone. Marco was sitting at the table, helping her peel oranges for fresh juice. The domestic scene was so normal, so perfect, that for a moment Vinny almost managed to forget the dangers surrounding them. "Good morning, Dad." Marco ran to hug him, his small hands still sticky from orange juice. "Elena is teaching me how to make juice, just like she used to make for Sophia." The mention of Elena's deceased daughter's name brought a momentary expression of pain to her face, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "Good morning, Vinny. Did you sleep well?" "Well enough," he lied, accepting the cup of coffee she offered him. "Elena, after breakfast, I need to talk to you." She nodded, understanding from the seriousness in his voice that there were important developments. Breakfast proceeded with Marco dominating the conversation, talking animatedly about plans for the day. He wanted to show Isabella's altar to the neighbors, wanted to learn more words in Spanish, wanted Elena to teach him how to make tortillas from scratch. His energy and enthusiasm were contagious, and Vinny found himself genuinely smiling for the first time in days. After Marco went upstairs to brush his teeth, Vinny took Elena to his office. She sat in the leather chair facing his desk, her hands clasped in her lap, waiting. "El Lobo is in Boston," Vinny said without preamble. Elena's face instantly paled. "Here? In the city? Arrived 3 days ago. He's at the Ritz-Carlton and has been meeting with the Russians." Vinny leaned forward, his voice becoming softer. "Elena, I need you to tell me everything about what you saw that night. Everything." Elena closed her eyes as if preparing to relive a nightmare. "It was in a warehouse in Tijuana. I was making a routine delivery. Just money, nothing more. But I arrived earlier than expected." She paused, her hands trembling slightly. "I saw El Lobo arguing with another man, someone I didn't know. The argument got more intense, and then," she swallowed hard, "El Lobo pulled a gun and shot the man in the head. Just like that, without warning." "Did you see the face of the man who was killed?" "Yes, he was young, maybe in his 20s. He had a scar on his neck." Elena opened her eyes, looking directly at Vinny. But that wasn't all. After El Lobo killed the man, he said something to his thugs. He said the man was stealing from the cartel, selling information to the DEA. Vinny felt a spark of hope. If Elena had witnessed El Lobo killing a DEA informant, that changed everything. The federal agency would be very interested in her testimony. "Elena, would you remember the man's face if you saw a photo?" "Yes, I'm sure." Vinny picked up the phone and dialed a number he rarely used, a contact at the DEA he had cultivated over the years. Relationships with federal agents were delicate in his line of business, but sometimes they were necessary. "Agent Sarah Chen," answered a professional voice. "Sarah, it's Vincent Torino. I need a favor." There was a pause. Sarah Chen was one of the few federal agents who understood the nuances of the organized crime world in Boston. She knew Vinny operated in gray areas, but she also knew he had principles and that his information was always reliable. "What kind of favor, Vinny?" "I need information about DEA agents who disappeared or were killed in Mexico in the last 5 years. Specifically, someone young with a scar on their neck." "That's very specific. May I ask why?" "I have a witness to a murder that might interest you. Miguel Hernandez, known as El Lobo." The line went silent for a long moment. "Vinny, you know El Lobo has been on our most wanted list for 3 years?" "I know, and I know where to find him." "Where are you now?" "At home. And Sarah, this is urgent. El Lobo is in Boston and he's after my witness." "I'll be there in an hour." After hanging up, Vinny turned to Elena. "A federal agent is coming here. If you can identify the victim you saw El Lobo kill, they can offer official protection in exchange for your testimony." And if I can't, then I'll resolve this my way. Elena studied him for a long moment. Would you kill for me? The question was direct and honest, and deserved an equally honest answer. I would do anything to protect you and Marco, even knowing it could bring trouble for you. Vinny stood and walked to the window, looking at the garden where Marco was playing with fallen leaves. Elena, for the last 2 years since Isabella died, I lost myself. I dove so deep into business, into power, into control, that I forgot how to be human. He turned to face her. You and Marco brought me back. You reminded me that there are things more important than money and influence. There's family, there's love, there's the chance to be a better person. Elena stood and walked to him, stopping just inches away. Vinny, I know it's complicated, he interrupted softly. I know my world is dangerous, that my life isn't normal, but I also know that when I look at you, I see a future I didn't imagine was possible. Elena raised her hand and touched his face, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Are you sure you want this? A woman with a past like mine? A woman who could bring danger to your life? I'm sure, he said, covering her hand with his. You brought light to this house. You brought joy to my son, and you brought hope to me. Before either of them could say anything more, the doorbell rang. Agent Sarah Chen had arrived. Sarah was an Asian American woman in her 40s, with black hair pulled back in a strict bun and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She wore a dark suit and carried a leather briefcase, looking exactly like what she was, an experienced federal agent. Vinny, she greeted, shaking his hand. Thank you for calling. Sarah, this is Elena Rodriguez. She's the witness I told you about. Sarah studied Elena with professional eyes, assessing her credibility and emotional state. Ms. Rodriguez, I understand you witnessed Miguel Hernandez committing murder? Yes, Elena replied, her voice firm despite obvious nervousness. Sarah opened her briefcase and removed several photographs. These are photos of DEA agents who disappeared or were killed in Mexico in the last 5 years. I'd like you to look and tell me if you recognize any of them. Elena examined the photos carefully, her expression becoming more tense with each image. Finally, she stopped at a specific photo, her face paling. This one, she said, pointing to the photo of a young Hispanic man with a visible scar on his neck. This is the man I saw El Lobo kill. Sarah took the photo, and Vinny saw an expression of grim satisfaction on her face. Special Agent Carlos Mendoza. He was infiltrating the Sinaloa cartel for 2 years when he disappeared. We presumed his identity had been discovered. El Lobo said he was selling information to the DEA, Elena added. That confirms our suspicions. Sarah turned to Vinny. Where is El Lobo now? Ritz-Carlton, Presidential Suite. Registered as Eduardo Vasquez. Sarah picked up her phone and made a quick call, speaking in codes that Vinny couldn't completely decipher, but which clearly involved organizing an arrest operation. Ms. Rodriguez, Sarah said after hanging up, your testimony is extremely valuable to us. In exchange for your cooperation, I can offer federal protection and a new identity program. Elena looked at Vinny, conflict evident in her eyes. Would that mean leaving Boston? Leaving? She didn't finish the sentence, but Vinny understood. Not necessarily, Sarah said. If we can arrest El Lobo and dismantle his network, the threat against you would be eliminated. You could maintain your current life. And if you can't, then yes, you would need a new identity in a safe location. Vinny felt his heart tighten at the possibility of losing Elena, but he knew the decision had to be hers. Elena, do what's best for you. Regardless of what you decide, I'll support it. Elena remained silent for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she turned to Sarah. I'll testify, but I want guarantees that Vinny and Marco will be safe too. Of course, Sarah said. We'll coordinate with local authorities to ensure protection for the entire family. Over the next 2 hours, Elena gave a detailed statement about what she had witnessed, including dates, locations, and specific descriptions. Sarah recorded everything, occasionally asking questions to clarify important details. Meanwhile, Vinny coordinated with his own men to ensure additional security for the house. He knew that once the federal operation began, there would be a period of vulnerability where El Lobo might attempt a desperate move. Around 3 in the afternoon, Sarah received a call. "Understood," she said, hanging up with a satisfied expression. "El Lobo has been arrested. We found enough evidence in his hotel room to keep him detained while we prepare the case." Elena collapsed in her chair, relief evident throughout her body. "Is it over?" "The immediate part, yes," Sarah said. "But we'll need your testimony at trial. That could take several months." "Will she be safe until then?" Vinny asked. "With El Lobo in prison and his network being dismantled, the immediate danger has passed. But we'll maintain discreet surveillance until the trial." After Sarah left, Vinny and Elena found themselves alone in the office. The silence between them was charged with unexpressed emotions and unexplored possibilities. "So," Elena said finally, "it seems I can stay." "If you want to," Vinny replied. "But now that the danger has passed, you have choices. You can go anywhere, do anything." Elena approached him, her eyes shining with a mixture of tears and hope. "And if I want to stay here, with you and Marco, then I would be the luckiest man in Boston." She smiled, and for the first time since he had known her, it was a smile completely free of fear. "Vinny, you saved me, not just from the physical threat, but from a life of running, of looking over my shoulder, of never being able to form real bonds. You saved me too," he said, pulling her into his arms. "You brought me back to life." At that moment, Marco appeared at the office door, his eyes bright with childish curiosity. "Dad? Elena, why are you crying?" Elena laughed through her tears, kneeling to get to Marco's height. "We're crying because we're happy, mijo. Very, very happy." "That's good," Marco said, hugging both of them. "I'm happy too. Now we're a real family." That night, the three sat before Isabella's altar, but this time, there was something different in the atmosphere. It wasn't just a celebration of the memory of someone who had departed. It was also a celebration of a new life that was beginning. Elena told stories about Sofia, sharing precious memories of her daughter with Vinny and Marco. Vinny spoke about Isabella, about how she would have loved Elena, and how she would be happy to know that Marco had someone so special taking care of him. And Marco, with the simple wisdom of children, declared that now they had 2 mothers in heaven watching over them, and 1 mother on earth to hug him every night. 6 months later, Vincent Torino married Elena Rodriguez in a small and intimate ceremony in the garden of his mansion in Beacon Hill. Marco was the ring bearer, and the altar they had built together for Isabella was decorated with fresh flowers for the occasion. Vinny had gradually distanced himself from the darker aspects of his business, focusing on the legitimate construction company and using his influence for positive causes in the community. Elena had become not only his wife, but also his partner in transforming the Torino Foundation into an organization that helped immigrant families establish themselves in Boston. And Marco? Marco grew up bilingual, bicultural, and with a deep understanding that true love knows no boundaries of nationality, social class, or past. He learned that sometimes the most important people in our lives arrive when we least expect them, coming from places we never imagined. On their wedding night, as Vinny and Elena danced in the garden under the May stars, he whispered in her ear, "Thank you for teaching me that it's never too late for a second chance." Elena smiled, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. "Thank you for showing me that home isn't a place, it's where we are loved." And somewhere in the shadows of Boston, Vincent Torino, the man who had built an empire in darkness, finally found his light, a light that came in the form of a brave woman who had lost everything, but who still had enough love in her heart to heal a broken family and transform a house into a home. The altar for Isabella remained in the place of honor in the living room, now accompanied by a small photo of Sofia, 2 women who had departed too early, but whose love continued to guide and protect the family they had left behind. And every night, before sleeping, Marco said goodnight to his 2 mothers in heaven and hugged his mother on earth, Knowing he was surrounded by a love that transcended life and death, borders and differences, past and future, it was finally a complete family.